everybody. Welcome to JETT Radio. I'm Ted Char, your host, and Amy Parodi is joining us today. She is a senior manager of public relations at World Vision, and she has been involved in some of the events that we've all heard about, the tsunami in Southeast Asia, and other things that she's going to tell us about. So, Amy, welcome.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, tell us about yourself and your work.
Yeah, I've been with World Vision for more than 15 years at this point, and I work in the communications department, and so I've had a chance to see different facets of World Vision's work all over the world. I've had a chance to travel to quite a few countries and see the work myself, and it's a fantastic organization, and they do a lot of really great work serving people who really need it.
Yeah, what are World Vision's strengths?
I think there are probably three that really stand out to me as strengths. One of them is that World Vision is a really big organization, and sometimes people think, oh, that's maybe not a good thing, but we find that our size really is a strength of ours. For one thing, it allows us to be very cost effective. We can buy supplies, buy equipment in bulk, but more importantly, we learn in bulk, if that makes sense. We can invest in some of the best experts in the field from all over the world, and as they create and learn best practices in community development, they're able to train and prepare staff all over the world and are able to touch millions of people with the best that the development community has to offer. We touch, because of the breadth of our work, we touch nearly every facet of a community's poverty. And so rather than just doing clean water or just doing food or just doing income generation, we're able to work with all of those facets that contribute to and help communities draw out of their poverty. And so we're able to sort of create solutions with the community that address multiple problems at the same time, because so much of poverty is sort of this complex mishmash of issues, and because we can touch on so many facets of that poverty, we're able to find solutions that address that mishmash of issues. And then really just the impact that you're able to have as a big organization. We are about a $2.7 billion organization internationally. We've got about 44,000 employees in about 100 countries. And when you've got that much resource behind you, you're able to have a big impact. And so, for example, last year, we responded to about 137 disasters in 47 countries and served about 12 million people affected by those disasters. We've got about 3.3 million sponsored children all over the world, about 41 million children benefiting from that work, whether they have sponsors or not. And we're the largest distributor of World Food Program food. We're the largest non-government provider of clean water. And you can only do that, you can only have that kind of impact when you've got some size. And so I think our size is one of our great strengths. Another one is that we're professional. We're an expert organization. It's not hard to start a nonprofit. There are lots of people with sincere, great hearts that have started nonprofits. But in order to do community development well, you need a great heart plus a great deal of knowledge. And we're an organization with really incredibly knowledgeable people, and they're able to pool their expertise and create solutions with communities that really work over the long term. And then finally, we're a Christian organization, and a lot of people would think, not sure that really matters on the ground, but we really find that it does. We've found that the truest measure of a child's well-being is not just found in growth charts or literacy statistics, but when children have their physical needs taken care of and are being fed spiritually. And that can happen in countries where the majority of people are Christian, but it can also happen in countries where most people don't necessarily share our faith. Some 84% of the world's population identifies with some faith or another. And so just being able to speak the language of faith, even if it's a different faith, gives us an advantage to being able to help people really find true well-being, not just physical development. We work, we do a lot of interfaith work, particularly I'm thinking of like West Africa. We bring Muslim and Christian leaders together to improve the conditions in their communities. I can think of an example in Sierra Leone a couple years ago when they were dealing with an Ebola crisis. We had imams and Christian pastors working together in their communities to help people understand how Ebola was spread and protect themselves against that. And that is so much easier to do when you can speak the language of faith, when you have that inherent trust that comes from a shared sense of faith, that you can empower those leaders within the communities already to help people and protect people. And so I really do think our faith basis, our faith ethos is a critical strength of ours.
Yeah. No, that's an important point because there, for quite a while, perhaps in academic circles and elsewhere, it was common to hear that it was detrimental, that the work of missionaries was detrimental when they would go into a country. And actually, perhaps that was true in some cases, but overall, they have shown through evidence that when missionaries go in, it actually improves communities, and you're talking about some of that type of work. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think any work can be done poorly or it can be done well, but I think the element of faith is so important because when you're talking about people's well-being, you're talking about physical issues for sure. You can't have well-being if you're hungry, if your body is being ravaged by waterborne diseases, etc. But just being physically healthy does not necessarily mean that you have full well-being. And the phrase that we like to use at World Vision is fullness of life. It's a biblical term. And so it's something that comes out of our faith as a Christian organization. But we want the children and the families and the communities we serve to have fullness of life, not just physical health, not just a job. And when we come in with that as our perspective, that changes the work to some degree. And like you said, when you're looking holistically, when you're coming in wanting to address full well-being, it changes the work. It changes the way that you look at people. It changes the way that you encourage them to look back at you. And things improve, but not just in the sort of statistical health sort of ways that you can measure. And certainly those do change, but you also see people gaining hope, gaining a sense of joy, gaining a sense of promise for their lives because they believe that there is a God who wants them to have this fullness of life, that created them for this fullness of life. And that it changes that work. And it makes the sort of physical, tangible work better, but it also adds another layer of growth and development to that work. Yeah.
No, that's an important point because even in the medical community, it's widely recognized that stress can negate gains in physical health. Actually, I've experienced that in my own life.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, it is. It's interesting to see because some of that research is relatively recent. It's interesting to see the scientific community study to whatever degree they can the impact of that kind of spiritual perspective and spiritual layer that's laid over work, and to see that it really does improve the physical, even if you don't necessarily believe in that spiritual level, to see that it really does change and improve and sort of elaborate on or build on the physical and makes that work better. It's really encouraging to see the scientific community recognize that.
Yeah. I for the longest time, I didn't realize how much that non-physical health determines our choices of physical health. So really, it is more in the driver's seat than physical health, mm-hmm. because eventually, whatever our non-physical health is, emotional, relational, spiritual, mental, that determines how we behave, and our behavior determines our physical health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does. And even just something as simple as understanding who you are. When you see yourself as someone who was created by a God that loves you, then it does. It changes your choices. It changes the way you interact with other people as you see them as creations and deliberate creations with a purpose and a plan and a good purpose and a plan. So even just something as simple as that can change not just your choices, but the way that your body responds to stresses around it. It's really incredible.
Yeah. Hey, tell us a little bit about the history of World Vision.
Sure. World Vision was founded by a man named Bob Pierce. He was a filmmaker for an organization called Youth for Christ. He was traveling through China as a Christian evangelist and was just overwhelmed by the poverty that he saw in Asia. And so he began filming what he saw and sharing the films at American churches and asking people to donate money to support individual children that he had met. And so in 1950, he sort of incorporated all that as World Vision. And so the organization started with a focus in Asia and really was funded by, and a lot of the programming was driven by this idea of sponsoring children and sending money that helped individual children. But then over the years and the decades, the organization has evolved, it's grown, and a lot of sort of the model of its work has changed. And since that time, we've tackled some of the biggest developmental challenges in the world at various times. I'm thinking of following the Vietnam War. World Vision had this huge ship that they called Operation Sea Sweep, and they used that to rescue Vietnamese refugees that were stranded in the South China Sea. And actually one of our board members was one of those Vietnamese refugees that was rescued. We were one of the leading organizations addressing the famine in Ethiopia in the early 1980s. We, in the 1990s and the early 2000s, were a really powerful voice for challenging the American church to care about the global AIDS crisis. And that was a topic that the American church really didn't want to talk about at the time. I'm thinking of disasters like the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, the 2010 Haiti earthquake. We were one of the biggest and most influential organizations responding to those. And today, we're fighting for refugees from Syria and Iraq and other dangerous countries, and providing clean water to millions. And so those are just some examples of how World Vision has grown from one man who cared very deeply about some individual children that he met to a country or an organization that now works in about 100 countries.
Yeah, tell us about your experience in the after the tsunami.
Oh yeah, that was such a devastating disaster. There were so many people, hundreds of thousands of people affected by that. And when I traveled, I spent my time in Sri Lanka and was there really not even immediately after the disaster. I was there several months after, and still the impact was incredible to see. You could still see whole communities that had just been flattened, that had just been snatched away by the water, and families that were still recovering from the loss of family members, the loss of their homes and their livelihoods. And to see World Vision's work there was really incredible. I mean, World Vision was already in Sri Lanka, was already in India, was already in Thailand, was already in Indonesia before this disaster hit. And so in some cases, we had staff members who were there on the beaches helping people minutes and hours after the tsunami hit. We had staff that were affected by the tsunami themselves and were on the ground first in, helping people before we really even had a chance to assess the full level of the damage. And we were there for years. I mean, really, we're still in those countries, but the work that was focused on the tsunami recovery, we were there for years, and we were able to help people get back on their feet. But because we were there, we were already working there, we were able to transition them from sort of a tsunami recovery kind of work to community development work, with really not much of a break at all. It just transitioned very smoothly because our staff are there and they're able to do both the emergency response work and the community development work. And so the handoff was this, really wonderful, seamless transition back to, okay, now we're stable. Now let's get to the work of rebuilding your community over the long term.
Yeah, describe that rebuilding process for us.
It starts with assessment, and really just about every facet of our work starts with that. Starts with getting a handle on what the problems really are. And with a disaster, that looks different than it does in community development, but it starts with assessing the damage and assessing World Vision's strengths. We touch on nearly every facet of poverty, but that doesn't mean that we can do everything all by ourselves, nor do we want to. And so we look within our own organization to see, okay, so we've assessed the problems. This is what the landscape looks like. This is what we're good at. This is what we've got the capacity, whether it's the resources or the expertise or the sort of the locational advantage. Are we in these communities already? Where can we be the most helpful? And then we're also communicating with other organizations who are doing similar work and can create programs and plans and sort of coordinate with them to make sure that we're doing the work that we do best, they're doing the work that they do best, and nobody's duplicating and nobody's missing anything.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds like it increases efficiency. Do you know, have there been studies done that compare efficiencies when you approach it with that kind of model versus kind of every organization for themselves type thing?
I don't know that I can quote a particular study. I just think we've found over the years that it so clearly works better. We've got so many examples sort of before we coordinated like that, examples of times when two organizations would show up with food to the same community and then another community over here didn't get any. And really it doesn't take long to figure out, hey, we need to talk to each other and figure out how to do this better. And in a particular country, all the organizations want to work together. They're all really shooting for the same thing. They all want people's lives to get better. And so it doesn't take long to go, okay, let's sit down at a table, figure out who's doing what, let's look at a map, let's look at where the needs are, and figure out how to get these needs met in the best way possible.
Yeah, what are the keys to working with other organizations?
I think probably the most important one is just finding a common table. And in a disaster, organizations like UN OCHA, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that's a common table that everybody can come to and know that this is where the best decisions are being made. This is where the players are going to be, so you can figure out who's going to do what and how and where. And really, after the tsunami, the UN system created this thing called the cluster system, and that's helped a great deal with emergency response. What they did was they said, okay, we've got a handful of, we call them sectors, but they're basically areas of work that need to be addressed in order for people to recover from this disaster. So they're almost working groups for each of these sectors. And so they'll take a water and sanitation sector and they'll say, okay, everybody who does water and sanitation, you meet with this sector, you determine the best way forward. And then there's a food sector or a health sector or a shelter sector. And that allows people to come in and do that coordination in the areas where they work best. And so you're not bogged down with meetings that you don't really need to attend, which can create all sorts of inefficiencies. But you're talking about the things that are important, and then you're getting back out into the field as quickly as possible to do the work. Yeah,
no, that's great. Hey, thanks for explaining some of the background. We're coming up to a break, but we will be back with Amy afterwards to continue our discussion on community sustainability related issues. Thanks for joining us today.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah!
If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30, right here on webcast1live.com, and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. I interview common everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
Hey everybody, I brought Northern Lights Pizza! And it's got Graziano sausage!
Rock and Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for their opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens, rock on! This is Pat McManus for Rock and Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live. From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey everybody, welcome back to JETT Radio. I'm Ted Char, your host, and Amy Parodi is with us today from World Vision. She is a senior manager with them and has had a lot of experience overseas and has touched base with many of the activities of World Vision. Amy, welcome back.
Great, thanks.
Hey, could you help us understand, and by the way, you're doing a great job of helping us understand World Vision's history and what they do in the world, but help us understand how you identify the root causes of poverty, since it's such a complex issue, and especially, if you could compare when there is that presence in the area beforehand versus coming into a new situation. Help us understand how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, it starts with listening. It starts with the community itself. Even though most of our staff locally are from the countries where they're serving, nobody knows the problems in a community like the community members themselves. And so when we come into a new place, we start with them. It helps us get to the root of things. It means asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of listening throughout the community, not just to the leaders, but to everyone in the community. And so when we first start working in a community, we identify the existing community leaders. We start with realizing who has the most influence on the community. We talk to them. We talk to community members. We use readily available data and surveying. We do what are called macro assessments. And so we take about 6 months to just get to know what's going on. And then once we've completed that assessment and really have a clear sense of where the critical issues are, then we start to work with the community themselves to co-design a program. We call that a critical path. But we take, really, could be a year or a year and a half, putting together a plan to address the problems in a community. But not just that. We spend that time working to build trust among the community members, among groups of people that need to work together, networks and joint working groups that are going to need to be working together over the long term to help a community pull itself out of poverty. And at the end of that process, we've got a development plan on paper that outlines what's going to be done over the next several years. But that development plan is bigger than just the work that World Vision does. And so it includes what we're going to do, and that's part of that conversation that goes on during that year and a half is, here's what World Vision can contribute, but what are you going to contribute? Where are your strengths? What resources does this community already have that can be applied to these problems? And so that development plan is bigger than just World Vision's work. It's the work that the whole community is going to do. And then over the next 3 to 5 years, we implement that plan. So we start to do that hard work. But every 3 to 5 years, we go back and start asking questions again. How are things working? Are we making the progress that we want to? And if not, what's the obstacle? What's keeping us from making that progress? And then we'll go back, and it's a shorter assessment at that time because we've got a lot of that base knowledge, but we go back and ask a lot of questions, and then we tweak, we redesign if we need to, and then we go for another 3 to 5 years, and we just do that in cycles until there's a base of development that can be built on, and more importantly, the community members themselves are at a place where they can take it from there. And then World Vision closes down. And it's really a cool process when we get to that point. I helped organize a trip a couple of years ago to Cambodia where World Vision was leading a particular community. And they had this incredible celebration, and we invited some of the people who had sponsored children in that community for a long time to come participate. And the community was so full of life. The whole celebration was just so colorful and so vibrant because the work had been done, but it hadn't been done for them. This was a celebration of what the community had done for itself. And they expressed their thanks to World Vision for its help, but it wasn't just World Vision's work. It was the community's work. And with World Vision leaving, they were able to say, thank you, this has been wonderful. We've got it. We'll take it from here, and continue that work and continue to see their children flourish without World Vision's presence. And it's really incredible.
Yeah. How long did that take to get to that point?
We've found that 10 to 15 years is a pretty ideal range that allows us enough time to make changes. I mean, when you're in communities that have really debilitating poverty, a 1 to 3 year program is not going to jumpstart the change that needs to happen. You need to be in there for a long time. At the same time, you don't want to be there so long that you create a dependency. You create a sense where, no, we need World Vision because we don't want people to need us after a while. And so we've found over the years that about 10 to 15 years is really an ideal window where we can contribute our part and get a community moving forward, but we don't become so much of a part of their fabric that when we leave it becomes and creates problems.
Yeah, and how long, so obviously the point is so that you create that long-term ownership so that it lasts, and how does that bear out? How long does it last when you create that ownership?
If really it lasts. I mean, the organization's been around since the 1950s. We've got communities, we've got many communities that have sort of graduated, or we've graduated out of the community, and the vast majority are doing just fine. They've taken it and they've run with it. We did a huge research project a couple of years ago on the success of our sponsorship programs, and we call them area development programs, but the communities where we focus our work. And the vast majority of them have taken what they've learned and they've moved forward. They don't need us anymore, and they're doing well.
Yeah, and tell us about the scope of that study.
That was, I'm trying to think how many countries, because we obviously didn't do the research in all 100 countries where we work. But we did a sample of countries in the various regions where we work. So we work in Asia, in West, East, and Southern Africa, in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. And so we took a sample of countries there and went back to the area development programs where we'd worked. And so I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I know in East Africa it was Uganda. I believe it was Bolivia in Latin America, and I can't remember the other two countries. But
that's okay. So, what was the time range in there? Were some programs been going for 20 years and others for 50 years? So give us an idea of the time range there.
Yeah, most of the ADPs, the communities where we work, we've not gone, to my knowledge, any further than 15 or 20 years. And we have found that once we get past 15 years, we really need a good reason to be there, because it does start to create dependencies that aren't healthy. And so I don't think there were any programs where we've been there doing community development work for 50 years.
Right. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So actually what I was asking is, right. So you don't want to stay too long, but then was there a part of the study that looked at what happened after you left?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, what we did is we went into these handful of countries, and we looked at a variety of communities where we worked. And some of them were communities where we were just finishing up our work just in the last couple of years. And some of the communities, we had been gone for 5 years, and some of the communities, I think we'd been gone for 7 or 10 years.
Okay.
And so we got a range of, okay, if we take a step back, do we find that they're fine for 6 months to a year and then problems start to arise, or does this really have long-term impact? And the majority of the communities that we visited, even 5 and 7 and 10 years later, were doing well.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to have someone go in and do a study on some of the communities where you first started. You know, if World Vision started back in the 50s, could one of your researchers go to some of those communities and say, hey, here's how they're doing, 40 years later, 30 years later.
Well, and it's interesting because one of the first countries where we started work was in Korea. And even just looking at it from a national standpoint, the nation of Korea is doing so much better than it was 50, 60 years ago when it was at war and struggling with internal conflict. If you look at South Korea now, it's a totally different place. And that's been incredible. And obviously that's not just World Vision's work, but it has been really incredible to see how World Vision in South Korea has evolved. In its first days, it was, very basic sort of survival level service and help. And now the office in Korea is a fundraising office, and the people in Korea are contributing not to work in Korea, but to work all over the world because they're okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a show that focuses on sustainability, so I have to ask some sustainability questions.
All right.
So have you seen the interaction of personal sustainability, health and wellness, with community sustainability and environmental sustainability?
Sure. If I'm understanding your question correctly, all of those things overlap. If you're in a place where the environment, the climate, the soil, the forestation are in crisis, then the communities there are going to be in crisis. The individuals within those communities are going to be in crisis because all of those overlap with each other. And so in places where you're looking at, sort of the physical environment, our work has to address that. We have to address soil quality. We have to address deforestation. We have to address water quality and water accessibility, because without those things, individuals and then the communities that those individuals create, they can't succeed if they're in a depleted environment. And so if I'm understanding your question correctly, that environmental component to community development is very, very critical.
Yeah. Could you share some examples of where your work was, where you saw better land management, better soil conservation result in better communities, or something along those lines? It could be water or deforestation, things like that.
Sure. One really just sort of classic example is the Ansokya Valley in Ethiopia. During the famine, and then in the early and mid 1980s, the Ansokya Valley was almost a ground zero, and it was. You can see photos. Some of the sort of iconic photos from that time were taken there, and it's a wasteland. It's dust. It's a dust bowl, and World Vision was one of the critical organizations working in Ethiopia, doing the emergency food relief for people who were acutely starving at the time. But as that acute emergency began to be addressed, started working with the soil and the land management in that valley. And if you look at photos of the Ansokya Valley now, it's a totally different place. It looks like a completely different planet. It's green. It's vibrant. The water management ensures that crops are well nourished. They're well hydrated, and people there are doing well. They're well nourished. They're experiencing this fullness of life that we're pursuing. It's one of World Vision's great success stories, because the change between the valley in the mid-1980s and today is just so striking. And we're doing similar work in West Africa, where we're helping farmers address soil depletion issues with, looking at what they're planting, looking at how they're constructing their farms. And it's earlier in that process, and so we haven't seen that full transformation yet, but we know that it's possible because we've seen it in Ethiopia.
Yeah, how did that happen? What were the water management strategies that took place?
Oh goodness, I may not be quite technical enough to know all of that. I know that it was a variety of interventions. It was a variety of approaches that work together. That coordination of, even just within our work, that coordination of tactics that allowed for that success. It wasn't just one thing that turned everything around.
Yeah. No, I've seen examples of that kind of environmental restoration. They'll have satellite photos of different regions before and after a transformation process, and it is possible to turn a desertified area into a thriving area again. And go ahead.
Oh no, just it's so striking to see it. There's a lot of community development that you're not always able to see visually, but that's one area where just the transformation is so visual, and it's so incredible to see that it really is. It's so striking and very exciting.
Yeah. Hey, we're up to our next break here. Amy Parodi is with us today. She is a senior manager at World Vision, and we'll be back after this break to continue our discussion of how to fight the complexity of poverty. Thanks for joining us today.
Northern Lights Pizza's amazing garlic butter makes amazing breadsticks. Now available in 12-ounce bottles at Northern Lights, Hy-Vee, and Graziano's.
Northern Lights Pizza. I'm Brian Leach, owner of Service Legends, and my position is Chief Talent Officer.
I'm Nicholas Wonderscheid.
I am Bernie Homs.
And I'm the Service Manager.
Marketing Director and Client Relations Manager.
Everything that we do is about ensuring that we exceed your expectations.
Our clients are important to us. 100% satisfaction.
We're not just focused on heating and cooling. That's the easiest part of our job, actually, is fixing furnaces and air conditioners.
Everyone that we come in touch with, we want to improve lives.
Bottom line is, we've got our installation guarantees, 25% energy savings guarantee, comfort guarantee, temperature selection guarantee, property protection guarantee.
100% satisfaction guaranteed. Fixed rate or it's free.
All of those guarantees are backed up with a 100% money-back guarantee to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that you get what you're after.
Just fixing the problem today. If they have another problem 5 days down the road, it's still fixed rate or it's free.
We use what's called straightforward pricing. Our technicians are going to give you an exact to-the-penny price on what it's going to take before they move forward with any repair. That way you know what to expect.
It's the same price every day.
No surprises.
If you get off work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you come home, you realize that, oh, my furnace is broken. Now you need to call somebody out that night. You shouldn't have to pay more for that.
We're guaranteeing service 24/7.
We run afternoons, evenings, nights, weekends. We're staffed to work that.
Phone rings at 3 in the morning. You'll get one of our representatives answering the phone every time.
We're not sending you out to Timbuktu in some call center. It's our Service Legend team members, our mission control team.
I'll take a call anytime.
And then they answer the phones the same way during the day as they do at night.
It's a great day at your service company. How can we make you smile?
That's the only way to provide true 24-hour service.
When you're able to let somebody actually live in their home safely when they weren't able to do that before, where they don't have to stay up at night and worry about, is the heat going to come back on? Are we going to freeze the pipes? Is the baby in the room next door going to be sick because they got too cold? When you're able to help somebody overcome challenges like that, that's impacting a life. That makes a difference. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
I love the team. I love the people that I work with.
We have fun, but we work hard.
I call them my ambassadors of legendary service. If you could just envision what that is, that's who we're sending to your home.
They literally will call in, pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I want to talk to your manager. And I get on the phone, they're like, that technician that was at my house was the greatest technician ever. That's cool to me.
We want to brighten people's days.
Every person that we have going into the house has gone through an extensive background check.
Drug testing, we have a very thorough interview process that 1 out of 140 people make it through.
If we promise you something, that's what you're going to get, no matter what.
We're here when you need us to protect the safety and comfort of your family.
If you're not happy, we're going to make it right.
If we're willing to put 100% money-back guarantee on what we do, what type of work do you think we do?
Give us a call. We're there for you 24/7, 365 days a year.
Enough said.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Hey everybody, welcome back to JETT Radio. I'm Ted Char, your host, and Amy Parodi is with us today. She is a senior manager of public relations at World Vision. Amy, welcome back.
Thanks, Ted.
Hey, can you help us understand how healthcare fits into poverty alleviation? And I know you gave us some background on, the starting point and how you untangle some of the complexity of poverty. Can we kind of go into that in more detail now, look at some of the individual parts and the contribution that they make? Help us understand, especially preventative health care.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking earlier about how sort of environmental health and community health and individual health all overlap, and really that personal health is critical. You can't serve your community, you can't serve your family if you don't have the energy to do the work that you need to do. If you're fighting sickness all of the time, you can't make the progress that you need to make. And so that personal health is critical. And really for us, a common starting point in a lot of communities is clean water and sanitation and hygiene. The impact of dirty water, the impact of a lack of access to water, where you've got half of your community spending all day traveling to a water source, is just debilitating. And if you don't solve the problems caused by a lack of access to water and the quality of the water, there's not much progress that you're going to make trying other interventions. And so that's a very common starting place for us. You've got about 3.5 million people who die every year because of the dirty water or lack of sanitation. It's about 4,000 children a day, and that's a stopping point. You really can't go any further until you've addressed that. And so that's a big starting point for us. And it's a huge component of our work. I think I mentioned earlier that World Vision is the largest non-governmental provider of clean water. We have built tens of thousands of wells all over the world, particularly in Africa and parts of Asia. And the transformation that we see in communities once those clean water sources are accessible to a community is just incredible.
Yeah. Have you used a variety of technologies for that? Has desalination been part of that effort?
Say that again. Has what been a part of it?
So there's wells, and companies all over the world are working on desalination technologies to take ocean water and turn it into fresh water. Or for countries on the coast, is that part of the solution?
I'm not as familiar with the coast. A lot of our work is inland, especially in very dry areas like West Africa. Ghana, Mali, Niger are some of the biggest countries where we've done this work. And so a lot of our work is accessing groundwater. And so we do a variety of different types of wells depending on the land and the structure and where best to access those water points, and then a variety of sort of access points themselves. So we've got sort of the shared points away from homes. We've got the pumps. We've got we really look at the needs of the community itself and create a system that'll work for them.
Yeah. Are you seeing lots of chronic disease, diet-driven disease overseas, like is taking place in developed countries, especially the U.S.?
It depends on the country. Are you talking about things like diabetes and some of the chronic diseases that we see here?
Yes.
Yeah, especially as economies change, the sort of threats to personal health change. And it's interesting in countries where you've seen a lot of economic growth, but it hasn't necessarily been equitably distributed. And so countries like India and China, Brazil, where you've got pockets of the population that have been able to sort of move up economically, that's where you're seeing a lot of those chronic health situations that we would be more familiar with here in the U.S. But at the same time, alongside them in the same country, you may still also see acute malnutrition. You may still see a lot of those diseases, the waterborne diseases, the cholera, the dysentery that we associate with poorer countries. Yeah,
and does World Vision do work in the U.S. and in cities?
We do. It's smaller than the work we do overseas, but we do disaster response. We do youth leadership development, and so we do have some programming here in the U.S.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Would this fit into World Vision's model? If at least here in the U.S., there's so much that is preventable because we're surrounded in the wrong food environment. We've got all this fast food and convenience food everywhere we go, and a fairly low, or actually very low, level of awareness about what that fast food and convenience food is doing to our bodies. Is preventive healthcare something that World Vision would want to engage more in the U.S., or is their mission and priorities mainly overseas?
The priority really has been overseas, and I'm not sure what the long-term plan might look like in the U.S. It's not work that we do right now. It is work that we do, obviously, overseas, but it's not work that we do right now in the U.S.
Yeah. Okay, so when we were talking earlier about the principles of addressing the complexity of poverty, Rich Stearns had published, who is the president of World Vision, had published a paper on that. The 4 principles. Did we leave anything out there, or did we already cover that pretty well?
I mean, looking over those principles, I think we've touched on a lot of it. The idea that poverty isn't just a physical thing. And in the paper, he uses the analogy of hardware versus software. So you can provide clean water, you can provide food, and you can deal with some of the hardware issues in a community. But if you don't have gender equality, if you don't have interpersonal reconciliation or interethnic reconciliation or interfaith reconciliation, then those physical interventions are only going to go so far. And so I think that's a critical principle. The idea of community ownership, we did talk about that, but it's such a huge component of really seeing long-term success. If the community owns it, they can take it and move forward with some support and with some expertise behind them. If the community hasn't taken it, you can work for decades, and your work will last about a decade and a year. It's not going to go much further than that. The idea of bringing in the experts, that you must have the motivation and the care and concern for people to do this work well, but that alone isn't enough. You have to have a level of expertise. You have to know your field to be able to do this work really, really well. And then finally, the idea that change doesn't happen overnight, because so many funding models, so many donors want to see quick results. And there are some things where you can see quick results, but to really see true, long-lasting community development, that is not something that happens in a year or two. And so being an organization that is able to commit to a community over the long term makes such a difference. And so those are the principles. And he even gives an example in the book of a sort of hypothetical or kind of Frankenstein story pulled together with some different examples from different communities of times when that didn't go well, when those principles weren't applied, and the negative impact that can have on a community.
Yeah. Who are some of the experts that you've brought in? Just think of a maybe the tsunami or you know much better than I do. What are some stories or examples of where you've brought in a team of experts to help untangle the complexity of poverty?
Well, honestly, it's usually not external experts. Our staff are experts. We hire experts. And so they may or may not be recognizable names, but our staff are part of global working groups of thought leaders and developers of best practices. And then we bring in, we'll bring in external groups to audit, to evaluate our work. We recently did that with the University of Chapel Hill. They've got the Water Institute there, and they came in and evaluated the long-term quality of our wells. And so they went out to wells that we had built a decade ago to see if they were still working, and the vast majority of them were. And so we'll bring in external groups to do that. But really, when I'm talking about experts, I'm talking about people that work for World Vision. We've got just more PhDs than I can think of, in areas like hydrology and agricultural development, who know technically the best ways to do this work. And so when you find that perfect person who's got that expertise, that technical expertise, and that passion to serve people and see them grow, you hire them and you hang on to them.
Yeah, share a story with us from one of your, say, community development experts.
Let's see. I would offer Joe Riverson. He worked for World Vision for a very long time. He's retired now, but a water expert, and just knew more about hydrology than I could begin to understand, but committed his life to that and traveled all over the world helping communities find the best ways to do this work, not just finding the best places to dig and the best ways to do it, but then also helping communities do training to repair the wells and take ownership of the wells themselves, to do the hygiene and the sanitation training that they need to do so that the clean water wasn't, or the impact of the clean water wasn't being wasted with other poor practices that would still make people sick. He was able to develop a holistic sort of program around water and sanitation that covered so many elements of just that one sector to make sure that communities were getting the full impact of not just a new well, but a new well and new sanitation systems and new ways of understanding how to keep themselves and their communities clean so that people stopped getting sick.
Yeah. And we're coming up to the last 5 minutes here. Help us understand how World Vision collaborates with churches in poverty alleviation, because a lot of churches send mission groups overseas for disaster relief or other types of programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a critical part of our work because we work with churches on both sides of our work. We work with churches in the U.S. to help fund our work, to invest in communities around the world. But such a critical part of our work is working with the church in the communities where we serve. So churches in Zambia, churches in Bolivia, all over the world. The church is such a critical institution in so many of these communities. If you're in a Christian majority country or a Christian majority community, the pastor, the priest, that institution of the church is central. And so they become a key partner to the work in the field. And they do a lot of our trainings happen at churches and are led by church leaders. We've got stories of people who have come to faith because they saw the rest of their life being transformed, and that was coming from their perspective, coming from the church, not even as much World Vision, but coming from their church. And so they invested more of their life in the church there. And then churches in the U.S. are such a critical partner to resourcing and supporting and encouraging the work overseas. And I think you mentioned mission trips. There are better ways to engage than others, and we consider it a responsibility of ours to help churches know how to do that well, so they're not sending uninformed groups of people on mission trips that really don't help.
If you were to describe the ideal process for a church partnering with World Vision, how would you describe that?
I think it starts with learning, with sort of awakening to a particular issue. And we've got churches that are passionate about particular issues, and some churches that just want to help, and so they're sort of just general sort of World Vision supporters. But we'll work with pastors to understand where their church's passion is. We've even got an assessment tool that's coming out in the next couple of months to help church leaders tap into what is it that our parishioners, our congregants are really passionate about. And then World Vision is such a fantastic resource to helping people learn about that issue. And so whether it's water or the refugee crisis, we can help congregations understand the issue and then plug into our work. And so we really don't necessarily encourage churches to send a bunch of people overseas. Often that creates more problems than it solves. We do encourage small groups of people to come over, see our work, and learn. But because we've talked so much about expertise, you want either experts doing work or you want the people themselves doing work. And so we don't usually have big groups of volunteers come over. What we do is we have small groups come over and learn and meet and connect with the people that they're going to be partnering with, so that there's that bond that we talked about, that trust building, that happens around the world as well. So there's a sense of bonding and a sense of relationship between this community and the church that's encouraging them.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for explaining that. So we are out of time, but Amy, really appreciate you coming and sharing with us on how to untangle the complexity of poverty and how that impacts sustainability.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time, Ted.
Absolutely. Hey, join us next time on Jet Radio when we tackle another sustainability issue. Thanks for joining us today.